Good evening. The charrette will start shortly. Good evening. The charrette will start shortly. Let's wait for more attendees to join the meeting. Let's give another minute for attendees to join, and we will start the charrette. Good evening. My name is Mary Tery Vilches. I am the project manager for the Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit Smart Plan East-West Corridor Land Use Visioning and Accessibility effort. On behalf of the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization, we welcome you this evening to the second series of charrettes for the East-West Corridor. We're looking forward to your input tonight. So we request that all participants follow a few simple guidelines. This meeting is being recorded. Panelists are encouraged to enable their web cameras when speaking. Participants will remain muted throughout the meeting. There will be interactive polling throughout the presentation. If you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A button and we will attempt to address during the presentation. To provide input during the brainstorm session, please submit comments and ideas through the chat button. Tonight, We have several panelists that will walk you through the land use visioning and accessibility process. They include Wyatt Bowers from Atkins, Maria Benfeld from Plus Sorbias. Additional members of the project team with us this evening include Janine Gaslon, Miami-Dade TPO, Rosa Davis and Manuel Amada, Miami-Dade Regulatory and Economic Resources, G. Vian and Francisco Arbeláez, Miami-Dade Department of Transportation and Public Work, Jack Schnettler, Atkin, and Juan Mullerat and Cristina Parrilla from Plus Sorbias Design. As noted, we are including interactive polling as well as 2 interactive brainstorming sessions throughout the presentation. We want to take this time to thank you for being here this evening with us. And before we get started, we want to offer any elected officials and or their staff that are here with us tonight an opportunity to address the attendees at this time. If you would like to speak, please click on the raise hand button so we can unmute your mic. It's my understanding that board member Eileen Higgins will be here present today and Vice Chair Juan Carlos Bermudez. Today is helping us, Lisa Juan is helping us. So Lisa, I see one hand raised. So are you gonna help us to unmute board member Eileen Higgins, please?
Hi, Mary Tery. It's Commissioner Higgins. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, good evening.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody that is here with us this evening to attend the East-West Corridor Land Use and Accessibility Charrette. This meeting, it's one of the many kinds of engagements that we're hoping to do to learn what you need from us in order to make getting us to and from work, school, parks, whatever we need to do faster than what we have now for folks living out west that would like to go to the east and folks that are living further towards the east to get out to places like the Dolphin Park and Ride, FIU, and back to their homes. This is all about you. Please participate. We appreciate your time. This is part of a process that is going to help us understand your needs, collect data, so that we would be able to also ask the federal government for help in funding this critical project so we don't have to pay for it all ourselves locally. We so appreciate you being here. And if you know of anyone that lives along this east-west corridor and they're not here tonight, please let your neighbors and your friends know that there's another meeting tomorrow. And unless we have your ideas, we cannot make this project work to be the best community project and public transportation project possible. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins, for your support. Thank you. Do we have any other public official that would like to speak to the attendees, or a staff from our public official that would like to read a message? Please let us know. Raise your hand so we can unmute you. At this time, we don't have any other hands that have been raised. So thank you. So now I will introduce you to Wyatt Bowers to get us started. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary Tery. So as you can see, everyone, we have an agenda here, and we just covered the first part. So we're also gonna kind of give you some background on the East-West Corridor and then dive right into the land use project description. And again, we'll have interactive polling throughout. We'll do some public input on the land use, and then we're going to move into stationary accessibility and get your public input on that as well. So let's first talk about the corridor and get a little background on the SMART plan. The overall SMART plan was approved by the TPO governing board in 2016. There are, of course, 6 rapid transit corridors that emanated from the original People's Transportation Plan, and then additional bus express rapid transit routes. There are multiple efforts underway, including the land use scenario envisioning, as well as economic mobility and accessibility efforts conducted by the TPO. That's what we're going to be talking about this evening. But also there are rapid transit corridor or PD&E efforts underway by FDOT, or in the case of this corridor, the Miami-Dade Department of Transportation and Public Works. So land use envisioning, the TPO is, looking at the direct relationship between transit and land use for all of those smart plan corridors. The data, as Commissioner Higgins said, will be incorporated in federal grant applications to hopefully get, federal approvals and federal funding. And the idea is to promote transit use and then increase mobility choices for those using the corridor. When we speak specifically about the east-west corridor, the selection of the locally preferred alternative is a critical milestone in the federal transit planning process. And that was achieved in October of 2020, where the TPO board adopted bus rapid transit as the locally preferred alternative, or LPA, for the east-west corridor. And that provides, again, the technical basis for development of the transit supportive land uses we're going to talk about tonight. Now, I know we had this map in the flyer that many of you may have seen about this meeting, and it may have been a little small and hard to read, so hopefully this is bigger and hopefully helps. But we'll be talking about this throughout the evening. The corridor map for the whole entirety of the corridor goes from the Miami Intermodal Center to Tamiami Terminal on the west. There are 13 stations over about a 16-mile length. But note that the initial implementation phase, as envisioned by DTPW at the moment, is on 836 with some service extending to downtown. And then a second implementation phase would come along, providing service along 7th Street and through Blue Lagoon. Now, the LPA, as I mentioned, you can see the station names there from, again, the Miami Intermodal Center all the way out along 836 to 87th, 97th, all the way out to the Dolphin Terminal, and then extending all the way to the Tamiami Terminal on the west-hand side. There are different technologies that will be used in different facilities, including bus on shoulder on the 836 extension, center stations, which I'll show you an example in just a second, on the primary part of 836, and then dedicated transit lanes on 7th Street from Mall of the Americas to Blue Lagoon. So again, this information is from the DTPW Rapid Transit Corridor Study, a vision of the 87th Avenue station, as you can see there with the center platform in the middle of the expressway and the buses using that median space. And the at grade, as I said, in the second phase along 7th is an example rendering here at the Milam Dairy Station near the Miami Airport Convention Center. So I want to dive right into some of our polling, and we have a series of questions. This one is, just a kind of a fresh to get you started. And so they should, you'll see, hopefully the poll will pop up here on the screen in just a second. And we're asking you how you heard about the meeting today. Was it by flyer, newspaper, email, internet and social media, or word of mouth? Okay, and I see the results are coming in, which is great. We'll give it a few more seconds, maybe another 10 seconds. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like most of you, of course, got this from email, but a little bit from seeing the flyer and social media as well as word of mouth. That's great. All right, moving on to our second question. Hold on. There we go. Were you familiar with the SMART plan before this meeting? Had you heard about it before the meeting? Okay, we'll give this another 5 seconds. Okay, we'll go ahead and close this one. And it's good that most of you have heard of it and a few somewhat, so that's terrific. Hopefully the word's been getting out. All right, now the questions are going to get a little bit harder here. How do you use the east-west corridor currently? Do you live on or near the corridor? Do you work or attend school along the corridor? Do you have both? Do you live and work on the corridor? If you don't live or work on the corridor, but you travel it regularly, maybe on your way to and from work, or even just travel occasionally to, say, go to the airport or the malls. Give this another, 10 seconds or so. Okay, let's close this one. All right, so this is actually a real nice mix, it looks like. We've got some people who live on the corridor, work, but the predominant number are folks who travel it occasionally, which is helpful. Okay, so our next question, if I can move forward on the screen, is how do you think rapid transit service along the east-west corridor affects traffic? Does it increase traffic? Would it decrease traffic, or do you think there'd be no impact? Another few seconds here. Okay, let's close this one. So interestingly, most people think it will decrease traffic. There are several who also noted no impact and a few who noted an increase of traffic. Our hope, of course, is that this would lead to decreased traffic, but it's interesting to ask the question. All right, similarly, how do you think rapid transit along the east-west corridor can affect housing costs? Do costs increase? Do they decrease, or is there no effect? All right, another few seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close this one. So it looks like we have some folks that believe that costs will increase. That seems to be the predominant answer. Also, some who feel like there'd be no effect, and a few who think costs will decrease. So thank you much. This is the first set of polling. We're going to move on into the presentation, and we'll come back for some additional polling as we're going throughout. I would note that we do have the Q&A button, and if you have any questions as I'm going through, go ahead and use the Q&A button. And we have a couple of spots along the way where we'll stop and be able to take a look at some questions. Okay. All right. So moving into our land use and project description, as well as getting some public input. Let's start in the big picture and how land use and transportation are integrated, and everything that you can see surrounding the circles, everything in our physical environment and even our natural systems, and culture, education, the environment, industry, energy, all relates to that land use and transportation integration. So that's why it's so key to everything that we're doing on this corridor and with the SMART plan as a whole. Now, in the overall planning process that we're doing for these TPO efforts, it involves some data gathering on socioeconomic, so population and employment information, for example, guidelines from the Federal Transit Administration, so that we're setting ourselves up to be able to take advantage of the federal grant programs, several series of charrettes and scenario development, which I'll go into. We're in the second series of charrettes tonight. We also are looking at how do the land use scenarios, for example, affect transit ridership, and then refining the alternatives and noting any land use policy changes that may be needed. Okay, so back to the corridor map, but this one's a little bit different. So this is our land use envisioning project area. You'll note that the project area extends about 1/2 mile in all directions around the transit corridor, and that potential growth would be focused in the stations, which are the blue dots on the map. But also note that some areas, for example, there's areas that are outside of the urban development boundary or on the Miami airport runways that are not suitable or, for that matter, permissible for development. So it does not mean that we would have development in all this entire pinkish buffer, but this is the area that we're focusing on as we move forward into the station area planning. So we had the first series of Charrette. As I noted, this is the second set. So a few years ago, we came in through the first series of Charrettes, and we got some really great input in those meetings. And you can see here a quote from an FIU student, which I think really spoke to us about, you know, their desire to increase their attachment to the city and give them mobility options. But we also, you know, did some summarization of the things that we heard at that charrette. You'll see some findings here, and you know, in terms of some of the polling questions, like we did today. But we also did what we call a COLA analysis, which is challenges, opportunities, liabilities, and assets. So we asked people, you know, what do you think some of the challenges are on the corridor? And so, for example, the physical barrier of 836 and the airport are challenges. At the same time, both of those might be assets on the corridor or opportunities. The fact that we have a CSX rail line alongside, connections to Doral and Coral Gables, the Ludlam Trail, industrial areas, great opportunities. In terms of liabilities, we do have some height restrictions because of being near the airport, and some concerns about those aspects, as well as financial capabilities and costs for setup. And then, as I noted in the assets, if you think about it, again, on 836, it's a challenge with the right-of-way, but there's also a very large right-of-way. It's an opportunity, and you have several 100,000 cars a day on 836. You have several malls, you have FIU, a diverse population. We have an airport with nearly 40, well, pre-pandemic, 45 to 50 million passengers, and the largest cargo volume, I believe, last year ever. So there's some great assets and opportunities on the corridor as we move forward. So now I want to kind of real quick, just kind of give you an intro into the scenario development, and then we're going to come back to it. But it's important to understand that, of course, there is natural growth that happens, right? Miami's a growing community. Florida as a whole is a growing community. And then that's going to happen regardless of what transportation investments we make. And so in this corridor, the population is projected to grow naturally by about 20% up to, you know, around 93,000 people, and employment a similar number, about 96,000, but that's a 40% growth. This is out to 2040, by the way. And so using that, we developed several scenarios to support different alternatives that were being studied, evaluated in the rapid transit corridor effort. And then tonight, we're asking for your input on our newest scenario, which is developed in support of the LPA of bus rapid transit. But before we get into that, I want to take a step back and talk about what do transit-oriented communities look like? You know, what is this thing about a station area that I'm talking about? And so you can see the graphic on the right, where we're looking about, you know, a quarter mile, that's your normal 5-minute walk. That's our transit core. And then maybe the half mile is this transit neighborhood. That's what we're focusing on. But there's also the aspects going out further in the transit supportive area. And that's where the accessibility and what we call first mile, last mile issues are going to come into play. And that's the second half of this evening's discussion. But again, we want urban form that's oriented to promote walking to stations as much as possible and within the land uses in the station areas. Now, here's an example. This is a corridor in the Washington, D.C. area. you can see this is a transit corridor, and the 5 circles on the map are where the stations are. And hopefully you can see that's where the higher density development is. And then even moving just slightly out of that circle, you end up with single family homes that have been in the same basically physical composition since the 1950s in this case. And this is a perfect example of a corridor and what we might look to doing, for example, on the east-west. So thinking about our east-west, where we have some activity areas already. As I mentioned, we have the airport and the Miami Intermodal Center area, Blue Lagoon and the office complexes there, as well as on Corporate Center, the Mall of Americas area, then moving out to Northwest 87th, and then the other malls of International and Dolphin. But we also have some things off corridor like FIU and downtown Doral, the City Place, downtown Coral Gables. These are the kinds of places that we need to figure out how people can get to and from them and the corridor. So that's a key component of the access. Now I want to kind of help envision, some things about scale and density. This is kind of a really interesting graphic. On the left is the Dolphin Mall. And from the edge of the Circle Road, it's about a half mile. And if you superimpose that on the right, that covers over the entire space pretty much of downtown Coral Gables. So it's helpful to understand scale and what that can mean in terms of how much development or land use you can accommodate in a specific area. It's also helpful to think about density. And I know sometimes there's concerns about, big, tall buildings. But here's 2 examples of similar density residential developments. And the main difference is the one on the left, maybe those, condominiums are 2,000, 3,000 square feet each. And on the right, those are micro apartments of maybe a couple hundred square feet each. But again, so when we think about dwelling units per acre or density, it doesn't necessarily mean big, tall buildings. So let's think real quick about some transit-oriented communities in Miami-Dade that you already have. What we call downtown Dadeland, or, at the end of the Dadeland South, at the end of the Metro Rail line today, you have a pretty robust development that's happened over the last few decades, and some really nice walkable communities with residential and retail below. Similar process in the Merrick Park area in Coral Gables near the Douglas Road Metro Rail station. And you can see in the image on the right, downtown Coral Gables is at the top of the image and the Douglas Road at the bottom. But, another example might just be, for example, at Brownsville Metro Rail, we have the transit village there. So it doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be 17 or 20 different buildings. It could be as simple as, one project that's right there next to the station that provides for great walkability. All right, so now we're into our next set of audience polling. And this is going to be a visual preference survey. So I'm going to leave the image up, but when your poll question comes up, we're asking you to rank it on a preference from 1 to 5. And you may need to or want to slide that poll on your computer screen if you can, just so you can continue to see the image. But I'm going to show you several transit stations in different communities in the US and ask you your thoughts on them. So this first one is in process. If you'll go ahead and take a vote on what you think from 1 to 5. And while the voting is going on, I will note that in all of these, we looked for images of transit corridors that are either on or adjacent near an expressway, so that we're in a similar kind of situation as our corridor. We'll give you just a couple more seconds here on this first poll. All right, let's go ahead and close it. Okay, so kind of a mixed bag there. We have a few people who seem to think it was pretty high, but mostly in the middle, and even a couple that were ranking it pretty low. All right, well, hopefully, let's see what we do as we move forward. We got a few of these to look at. So here's your second image to choose, and we'll open the polling on this one. And again, you may need to slide the pole away from the image if it will help. This is a burgeoning area where a transit station has been for many decades, but there is development occurring. You can even see some being built in the picture, primarily mid-rise structures, you know, in the 5 to 7 story range. And we'll give you guys another, say, 15 seconds or so on this one. Okay, let's 3 more seconds. Quicking. All right, we'll go ahead and close this one. And so, yeah, so it looks like the results are a little bit better. It's still mixed throughout, but definitely leaning. The most popular answer was number 4, so that's good on a 1 to 5 scale. This may be more applicable to our corridor, maybe. All right, next image. All right, and I will open the polling here in just a second, but we'll note there you can see, and this is a situation where the transit station is actually on the left-hand side of your image, but you can also see that this is near 2 expressways as they come together. Again, pretty much low to mid-rise development, nothing probably more than, with the exception of maybe that one building is maybe 10 stories, but most of it's in the 4 to 6 range. All right, let's give you guys another 10 or so seconds on this one. All right, we'll go ahead and close this one. Okay, so kind of similar to what we saw before, but again, definitely, you know, starting to head up in 3, 4 seems to be the average. So it's pretty similar to the last image we showed. All right, I got a couple more here. All right, here's one. This one, again, the transit corridor is actually on the left-hand side towards the top is where the station is. But you can see the expressway to the bottom of the image. Go ahead and open the poll on that. And again, you can rank your preference 1 to 5. Definitely this has more high-rise buildings, as you can see. And it's larger than some of the others in terms of spatial area. All right, we'll give you just a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's go ahead and close this one. All right, so this one's kind of middle of the road right there. You know, maybe there's a concern about you know, too much density, or maybe it's the makeup, and we'll be able to talk about this a little bit in the chat as we get into the brainstorming. And it helped us to, you know, think about what it should look like on our east-west corridor. All right, one more image. This one is probably the most in terms of height and density. But if you will note here, there is an expressway that goes along from right to left or left to right, but goes underneath the buildings in some cases. There's also a very large shopping mall, and that's where the transit station is. So think about that in terms of our corridor with the Dolphin Mall and International and Mall of the Americas. Let's go ahead and open the poll. And again, 1 to 5, low to high. Let's give this just a couple more seconds here for people. All right, 5 seconds. Okay, we can go ahead and close it. All right, perfect. So this is kind of interesting. Straight across, I think almost equal answers. 2, 3, 4, and then a little bit more to 5. And, you know, so it's interesting thought. And again, as we start to get into it, I will note that in all of these examples, and I didn't want to tell you where they were beforehand, but the first one was in Baltimore area. The second was in the DC area. The third was in Atlanta. The fourth was in the DC area, and this one is also in Atlanta. This is the Buckhead area with Lenox Square Mall. Okay, so let's now find ourselves back into our corridor. I want you, this is a little simulation that's going to run here, hopefully. There we go. That'll show you our corridor in terms of, the station line will draw in from the Miami Intermodal Center all the way out to the Tamiami Terminal. And as we showed earlier, we have stations at Lejeune, several stations in the Blue Lagoon area, and then working our way down 7th Street out to the Mall of the Americas, and then back up on 87th, 97th, and 107th, and on 836, and as well the Dolphin Terminal. So now I want you to think about the land use scenario that we've developed and get your thoughts on it in terms of population and employment, but also take note of the circles here, and I'll go over that in just a second because we're going to keep that in mind when we go to the brainstorming. So what we've come up with is that a station area population target for this corridor. Remember, I told you before that that natural growth gets us to about 93,000. So this is just an increase of about 20,000 over that in natural growth. And it would be focused in the station areas primarily at 107th and Dolphin Terminal, 97th, and the MIC in the phase 1. And then when phase 2 comes along, if there was development associated with stations along the 7th Street corridor. So that's kind of how we're thinking about our population and how it breaks down and where we're going to potentially focus that population growth. And now I want to ask you, your thoughts about that. Do you think that the 2040 Smart Plan population targets for the corridor, are they too high? Are they maybe too low? Or do you think it's probably about right? This is kind of like, Goldilocks thing here. Okay, I'm going to give you just a few more seconds here on these responses. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Okay, well, thank you. So it looks like most people think we got it about right, but a little bit on too high and a few others on too low. And again, when we get into the brainstorming, which we're almost at, we'll have an opportunity to talk about maybe where that development, that growth should go, and what kinds of growth you'd like to see. But now let's talk for just a second about employment. It's a similar situation. Again, I mentioned before that with natural growth, we assume that employment would go to about 96,000 or so. So we think there's a growth of about 23,000 natural growth over that number. Again, focused in those station areas at 107th and Dolphin and 97th and the MIC in the first phase. And in the second phase, focused along 7th Street corridor. So let's go ahead and open the poll here. And I'm going to slide the question over so you get to that. It's a similar question. How do you feel about the growth? Employment targets, is it too high, too low, or about right? Give this just a couple more seconds. Oh, mine froze. Okay, can you all still see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. It looked like my voting froze, so I wasn't sure. All right, well, let's go ahead and close it. And Lisa, yeah, I'm not able to see the results of the poll. But hopefully we have similar results as we did on the last one.
Very similar result, about right for this corridor is the highest. Sounds great.
Okay, I've lost screen, so I think we're almost at a point where I could take a break and hopefully we'll reset if I need to. Okay, so I want to move into a discussion about the generalized station area typologies. And again, if at some point, you know, I'm frozen or you can't hear me, just let me know. But I'm going to try and close the polls. Okay, so station area typologies, this is our next step, is to kind of think about on the corridor that not all the stations are going to be the same. So, you know, maybe there are some that are regional in nature. Think of, you know, in downtown Miami, in Government Center. And, you know, maybe in the metropolitan, you're talking about a slightly less density, but it can still work, you know, 6 to 15 stories. And then at the community level is smaller station areas, smaller density and growth. And it looks like I may be partially frozen, but I'm going to hopefully keep going, and hopefully the slides are changing because we're all, like I said, almost at a point where we can go to the intermission. But let me just kind of talk real quick about the regional station areas. We noted here that we're expecting only one, which is the Miami Intermodal Center, that qualifies as kind of a regional station area. And the thing to focus on here is we're talking about higher density multifamily development, residential, and then the non-residential is focused on mid to high rise buildings. Obviously, we do have the airport to keep in mind and the height restrictions there. But the big thing is minimal surface parking, that we want it structured parking as much as possible. An example is downtown Coral Gables. In, you know, an example of the metropolitan stations where we have several of them along the corridor, you can see them highlighted there. We're focused more on mid-rise multifamily, as well as non-residential buildings, also mid-rise, again, with minimal surface parking. An example might be some of the South Beach areas of Miami Beach. And finally, the community stations, of which there are most of them. We have 8 of them, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, along the corridor. And in this case, the residential is focused on low-rise multifamily as well as some single-family development. And then non-residential is focused low-rise. Understanding here that there will probably be surface parking, but it would be behind the buildings ideally. And an example is Miami Lakes that you can see there. Okay. We have now hit the point where we're going to go to an interactive brainstorming session. In just a second, I'm going to stop sharing, which will hopefully allow me to bring my computer back up and everyone will be able to keep going. But what we'd like you to do is Maria Serbia, but we want you to use the chat button to submit comments. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing at this point. We also have the opportunity now to take a look at any questions that we may have gotten so far. And Lisa, do we have any questions that have come in?
Not yet.
Okay, great. Well then, okay, well, thank you. So Maria's got her screen up and we did do some polling in here. What we'd like you to do is kind of just put in the chat window, you know, some of your thoughts, like, as we talked about, you know, some people thought we might have had too much development. Or is it that you want to see growth at, say, not at 97th, but maybe it's at 87th? And in the meantime, I do see we have a question. Commissioner Higgins would love to know that the land use visioning would also include green space and neighborhood planning for safe walking. Yes, so again, if there are some things like that that you'd like to see in some of these communities, go ahead and put that in the chat window as well. And we can note that as we're going along. I also see there's a comment in the chat about an opportunity to run the east-west corridor on 7th or Flagler. Again, as I understand the corridor that has been chosen, and this may have been a question which we can get G if you, or Francisco if you'd like to answer, but I know that the east-west corridor LPA is with 836 and 7th, and that there is a separate effort for Flagler, if that's correct.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Jian with the Department of Transportation and Public Works. Good evening. Thank you for the question. Yes, you're correct. The LPA that we received for the east-west corridor is the red line that you see on this screen, which consists of a trunk line, if that's a better way to call it, along 8th Street, 137th Avenue, and then the rest of the trunk line will be on the State Road 836. And then it also consists of a portion that goes into the Blue Lagoon area along 7th Street. So I guess, yes, the corridor will actually serve 7th Street in the Blue Lagoon area. And then Flagler corridor is it's a separate corridor of the SMART plan. And I believe the SMART plan corridor just received recently an LPA for the corridor. And I believe it's running, BRT service along the corridor with a section east of 24th Avenue running on dedicated lanes. So I'm not
Great.
sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, G. That was helpful. We did have, Maria, there's a comment in the chat about connections between the stations and FIU, noted maybe along the Snapper Creek / Turnpike as a path like the 836 trail. So, we'll start to put in these comments. Again, I did neglect to say we're gonna do this twice tonight. So we're focusing here on the land use part first, and then we're gonna get to access. But again, we can definitely, go ahead and put that in as you start to bring up thoughts.
And we have another question from Alexandra. Do you have a feeder pattern or access vehicles to get to the stations?
That's a great question for us. And so I think, again, to our point of what we'll get to next on the access and first mile, last mile, that might be something that we'll want to note, as that is a focus of our effort to try and identify how we do circulator routes that bring people to and from the station. Probably nobody lives on the 836, right? Or not very many. So we got to get to where people live and work. Any other thoughts for the chat for this first part? Again, about our population, employment, where we're putting our growth, do you see, for example, as I mentioned, we have the shopping malls on the west, 3 malls out on the west. Given the world that we're in with retail now, are the malls something that should be thought of for potential conversion or densification, or do we think the malls stay over the long term? We focused our growth, for example, at on 836 at 107th and 97th, but not at 87th. And that was possibly because of the way that whole interchange works, but you may feel differently. And then there is some point in the chat about any area of 836 land for TOD. So I guess the question being the actual 836 right of way. And I know we've talked about that before, Maria, so that might be something to go ahead and mark up in here. We do have some areas off to, now that we're going to put the bus, for example, in the median, maybe there's some areas off to the, on the shoulders out to the edge, not air rights for the lack of a better term, but maybe better use of the extra right of way. And then, okay, another question about the warehouses along 836 are, in Doral, are they open for redevelopment? That's an interesting thought. Again, as mentioned earlier, a lot of the warehouses are related to Miami International Airport, and it is a very large cargo airport. But, maybe that is a question and something to think about as we go forward. Let me see, it looks like, yeah, Maria, my screen is struggling, but we have another Q&A maybe. Comment some things like cities in Germany, okay? and some of the connectivity. Good.
Wyatt, we have another question. Is connectivity to the Longland Trail be considered?
That's a great question. Yes, that is our intention. But let's go ahead and mark that. So that would be near the 7th Street at Milam Dairy Station with the Ludlam Trail, and our opportunity to bring that through and serve that. Perfect. See, we were able to draw it in as we're going, which is great. It's definitely something we would want to consider. All right, let's take a couple more minutes here before we go back to the PowerPoint. So here's an interesting note of current zoning does not allow any residential development in certain station locations. Are there commitments to rezone those? I think that's one of the questions we're asking you all tonight, is to help us think about where the development should go. And then as part of the process, we need to work on any changes that would need to be recommended for the comprehensive plan and other documents to facilitate those changes. And then also a question about are there plans for the CSX right of way? G or Francisco, do you want to, could you answer that at all, or maybe we just put it on the board?
Hi, this is Gia. Right now, we don't have any plans for the CSX right away. You know, the county has been having conversations with the CSX, but right now there is no conclusion to that conversation yet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Wyatt. I received a question as well. How flexible will this plan be in relation to a potential underground tunnel connecting to the east-west corridor nodes?
Ooh. Wow, that is a good question. I know there's been a lot of talk about with Elon Musk and the Boring Company with some tunneling discussions in Miami. I don't know if Mary Tery or G or anybody want to take a shot at that, or
I'm sorry, this is Gia. I don't know anything about that for this corridor yet, but I'm interested to hearing if somebody else has more information on that.
Yeah, and in some cases, we're not going to be able to obviously answer things tonight, but we're going to, this is being recorded and we're taking all things down. And so we'll try to get some answers, and we'll incorporate in our effort. And I will note this later, there is a second meeting again tomorrow evening. If you want to choose to attend or tell your friends, as I think the commissioner mentioned earlier, and maybe we'll have some answers on things that we don't have yet. Okay, so a couple more real quick, and then we're going to move on. So if the CSX right of way is leased or purchased, will there be a commitment to add a cycle path? That is one question. Again, I think we could put that up on the board as a desire, that maybe there would be a desire for a cycle path in that area. And then the other note, if the Kendall Parkway extension moved ahead, would the Tamiami station change in character? That's a good question. One of the challenges with the Tamiami terminal, of course, is that a lot of the land around it is outside of the urban development boundary. But if something like the expressway were to come along, that might change some of that dynamic. So I think that's something we could note out here for Tamiami terminal, and maybe that would change the typology we were, thinking about for that station. Okay. Maria, do you want me to go ahead and we'll go ahead and stop sharing on your screen, and they can still work in the background. And I'm going to bring, hopefully, if my system will let me, my PowerPoint back up. There we go. It's just running slow. All right, hold on, folks. I apologize. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you can see that now. Lisa, are we good?
We are good.
Okay, perfect. I know it seems like my computer is overloaded on the polling and everything we were doing there, so it's working real slow. But we're moving now into the second half, which don't worry, it's not the same amount of time. But we want to talk about stationary accessibility, and there were some questions that came up just now about that and how we access these stations. So let's think about what first and last mile is. You know, again, most of us don't live or work exactly where the transit system is. So we need to be able to get from, especially the spine, in this case, the bus rapid transit corridor on the 836 to our home or work or shopping or school, whatever it is, to complement and augment the existing facilities that are out there for transportation, broaden the reach of transit if we can get it out to more people, expanding that choice. And again, it's all about leveraging that smart plan investments, which hopefully, again, makes a better case in the federal grant process. So now this is the similar map that you saw earlier showing the corridor and the stations, but you'll see there flashing. These are some areas that we might want to think about connecting to, you know, for example, downtown Coral Gables, FIU, City Place Doral, the Nicholas Children's Hospital, areas to the north of the Intermodal Center and out towards Miami Springs, for example. These are the areas that are near the corridor, within a mile or two, because honestly, it's only from the Lejeune stop to downtown Coral Gables is just a little bit over 2 miles, as an example. So we want to be thinking about how to get people to and from those destinations. And we want to think about it in a multitude of ways. So pedestrian access strategies, we need safe crossings and wide sidewalks, right? And active paths, but also thinking about universal design for all abilities, and keeping the vibrancy at the street level. Same thing with bicycle access strategies. Do we have secure cycle facilities, bike lockers? What about bike share and scooter share and things like that? Repair stations, again, safe crossings and how we do all of that. But, there's also the thought that there will be feeder transit routes, which somebody mentioned in the questions. So how do the feeder routes work? How do we integrate the bus rapid transit with regular bus service or the circulator trolleys? And do we have safe and comfortable waiting areas and, timed transfers and things like that? But we also understand in all transit cases, there are people who are going to be driving or arriving through rideshare, and especially on a corridor such as this with the 836 being predominant. So it's going to be important that we think about parking, pickup, drop-off areas, and also, but at the same time, making sure that we're doing traffic calming to slow the vehicles to enhance that pedestrian environment. Also for, how do you get, where's the station entrance? You need, some wayfinding at a pedestrian level, but you also might need wayfinding for parking, for people, for pickup and drop off, to let people know. And for example, accessibility, where is the elevator, for example, in the station platforms, to help guide people to where they want to go. We also need to be thinking, of course, about safety and security, enhanced lighting, shade and landscape, and making sure that wherever we can, we have eyes on the street to really enhance that feeling of safety. And then finally, station amenities. So at the station, what do we need in addition to your waiting area? Are you looking for, maybe some public space, a plaza, some visual enhancements? Maybe there's newsstands or a kiosk to pick up, some soda or flowers on your way home, as an example. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. So now I want to bring us back to the live polling, and we have a set of questions here in the live polling. So the first one is, which east-west corridor station are you likely to use the most often? And we are limited to we can only look at 10 answers. And so we combined a few there. You'll notice the 7th Street West stations are combined, as well as 7th Street East and Blue Lagoon. So go ahead and just, if you'll give us your thoughts real quick on which stations you think you would use the most. And Lisa, this is the point where my polling is locks up. So whenever you think you have a decent number of responses, go ahead and just close it out and we can look at the results.
Sounds good. A couple of more seconds. All right, I'll be ending the poll.
Okay, and then if you'll just tell us what the results are, because again, I can't see them. Oh, wait,
course.
no, it came across. I got it. Sorry, thank you. So it looks like a spread across, but the Dolphin Terminal seems to be the most heavily used. But that's helpful for us to understand where you all might be using which stations. Okay, moving on to the next question. How do you plan to access these stations? And not just the one that you use the most, but the corridor as a whole. Do you think you would walk, bike, drive yourself, which includes park and ride, or drop off, that would be ride share, bus, trolley, or some other method? Okay, and Lisa, it's slowly going up for me, which means maybe I'm getting connection back, but go ahead and close it whenever you're ready. Okay, thank you. It looks like most of you will be driving, so park and rides are going to be really important as we're thinking about the corridor. Okay, next question. So you could think about it in terms of that previous answer, or maybe it's different. But what is the most generally important access strategy for us to focus on? Is it pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, auto, or other? Give this a couple more seconds, I guess. All right, let's go ahead and close this one. So this is interesting. Again, we have auto, but also transit and pedestrian. And I would say, for me anyway, somewhat surprisingly, no one listed bicycle in our group tonight. Okay, I think maybe one more question here. What is the most important amenity that we should have at the stations? There's a list of 8 different options there, from auto parking to bicycle facilities, wayfinding signage, which we mentioned earlier, shade, lighting, and then community spaces, plazas, and then maybe food kiosks, and public art. So these were some of the amenities I mentioned earlier. Okay, give this just a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and close this one. And it looks like we have, I've frozen up again, but I think I have the results here. It looks, okay, here we go, a mix. It's good to know. So it seems like all of these things or many of these things are going to be important. But shade and auto parking were the top answers. So that's very helpful to us. Okay, so now we're going to go back into the Miro for just a minute here, which means I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But again, the same thing holds true. Use the Okay, thank you, Lisa. Hopefully that connection thing just fixed itself. But Maria, you've got it up now. And so these are some of the things we'd like to see in the chat. Some of your thoughts about what do we do for first and last mile access? I think there was a question earlier, how do we get, to FIU? So these are kinds of things we can note. So anything anyone wants to put in the chat? Okay, here's a note. we've got a couple things in the chat. Here we go. Turnpike express routes from South Dade and Southwest Broward. Okay, so we could show that with maybe an arrow down the turnpike. And then good coordination with the Doral trolley system. That's a great point. While we're waiting on a couple other chats, let me ask a question related to the FIU issue earlier. Do we think that if you were trying to go to and from FIU, would it be easier to do that from the Dolphin terminal or maybe from 107th Avenue station? Which one might be the better place to provide that connectivity? Okay, and then there is a question here, will any of the stations be located in the median? And yes, in the median of 836, the stations at 107th, 97th, and 87th Avenues would be in the median of the expressway. And so in those instances, you would, for example, at 87th and 107th, you would be down at street level and you would have stairs, escalator, elevator to get you up to the platform. And from 97th, it would be the opposite. You'd be above and you would come down. Looking at the chat and the Q&A, there was also a question on where in FIU you need to go. So maybe we need FIU access from both places. And yeah, and then noted, having options from both would be preferable. Schedule that works for peak class hours at FIU, which might not be typical rush hour. That's an important component. So maybe we need to be thinking, Gia, that's probably more in your area, but thinking about the service hours of the bus and when we're running those connectivity options. Also noted, I know I'm going real fast here, median shelters, they need shelter, fans, etc. So that's a good point. Coverage from the elements, but also maybe something that helps with temperature, keeping things cool. I think the South Corridor is actually going to have some climate control capabilities in some of their stations, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. And for the East-West Corridor, we definitely, want to follow the same criteria or standards to design our stations. Right now, it's still too early to provide you the information on how the station will look like exactly, but I believe, climate control elements will be incorporated into the station design.
Okay, and then we got a couple things else that came in real fast here. A question about how the proposed Panther station at FIU would fit in, and I think we can note that on the board. Again, Gia, I know that the corridor for East-West has changed and now goes out to Tamiami Terminal, so I guess that would be an issue of making sure that we had the good connectivity with feeder routes to FIU.
Yes, understood. And that is feeder routes will be one of the elements that we use to provide connectivity to the FIU. And I think, FIU still on the smart plan map as a smart plan terminal. And several bus express rapid transit routes will be serving FIU, such as the Flagler corridor, and also some of the Turnpike Express routes that are intended to connect to FIU. And also, I believe there was a TPO smart plan demonstration project that will be funding a service between FIU and the Dolphin Station. So, I think I might be missing things here, but we definitely are gonna, look at the connectivity from FIU to all these surrounding terminals and stations.
Okay, great. No, that's helpful. Also a note here about interviewing the malls to understand the travel time for their employees, which would also be helpful in terms of having service. And then, Gia, we're back to you. There's a question about, would the service areas and frequencies be similar to Metro Rail as it is today?
Yes, we are, for the East-West Corridor, there are 3 proposed routes. And I believe each one has a, peak frequency of 10 minutes. So the combined frequency would be, actually better than the metro rail service that we have.
Okay, great, perfect. And then two more things that I've got. A note to make people feel safe walking and biking to enter the stations on 836 from underneath. So that's an important thing as we're thinking about, especially on 107th and 87th. I think it would also apply on 97th. Again, that one's from above, but that's a very long, that bridge on 97th is a long distance. So security is an important component there and safety. And then we also have, there's a question or a comment in the Q&A about lots of expansion west and south of the Turnpike. FIU South Campus would be a good center. So that might be something we put on the board.
I'm sorry, this is Gia again. I just want to make a correction. I think the frequency it might be different than what I just said. Might be 15 minutes for each route. So the combined frequency would be, still comparable to the metro rail frequency.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And then I guess one more thing that's come in, could this service be used to go to MIA for flights for all kinds of different times of the day? So what before Gia, I'm sure you can take a shot, but I'll start by, noting that the end point of this line is the Miami Intermodal Center, with the exception of the routes that go to downtown. And so from the Intermodal Center, then you get on the MIA mover, right? That brings you right into the airport. In terms of the, hours of the line, I don't know, Gia, if you guys have gotten to that level yet.
You mean the service hours?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we're definitely looking at providing long service hours, and we're not finalized. We have not finalized our service plan yet, but it's gonna be better than most of our limited stop service and local routes. We're looking at at least providing service between 5 to midnight.
Great, that's perfect. Any other thoughts here? And I would say at this point, it could be on anything that we've presented so far. Again, if you have a question, feel free to put that in the chat or the Q&A. Go ahead and use either one. We're looking at both. But we've got, just a little bit more to wrap up when we're done here, but we've still got some time. So if there's any other questions or thoughts about access that we need to consider, maybe something that we didn't show tonight, maybe we missed, forgot about something.
We had a comment earlier, Wyatt. Would love to know that the land use visioning would also include green space and neighborhood planning for safer walking to stations.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So that's a good point, and I think we talked about that a little bit, but maybe, are there specific, maybe it's something that we want to make sure that every station area, that we have, a park score. And I'm sure Manny, the RER probably has something in the comp plan about distance from, average distance to a neighborhood park. And maybe that's something we want to make sure that each of these station areas has some green space within a 5-minute walk, for example. Here's a question. For the 7th Street section, would there be a transit underpass for the Palmetto just for these buses? So as I understand, the 7th Street connection is actually it's under construction to be opened now. As I understand, it's under construction now. I don't know if anyone from DTPW or anything has better information, but my understanding is that would be available to automobiles as well.
This is Gia. I'm not sure if it is right now under construction, but I know that it's definitely, a funded project at this point. I just don't know the schedule of the project to say for sure that it's under construction.
Okay.
Yeah. The last thing I heard was negotiation. They were still in negotiations.
Okay, thank you, Gia. Yeah, I will admit, guys, I'm calling from afar tonight. I'm up here in North Florida, but I've been told that it was under construction, but I haven't seen it myself. But we could definitely check into that. But it's on its way, as Gia was mentioning. There's a note that the north-south avenues are very hostile to walk or bike on. What plans are being made to address this to encourage pedestrians to use this line? I think so you put that in for us. Thank you, Maria. I think that's a key focus of our study effort, and the TPO will work very closely with DTPW in trying to make these avenues less hostile. I know, for example, at 87th, again, that new interchange is very large, and it's a challenging area, and I know that Gia, you and Francisco and the others at DTPW are looking at this, and it's part of the rapid transit corridor studies. But our accessibility effort that we're talking about tonight will help to inform that. So, but I would say if you have thoughts, ideas that you want to throw out this evening, go ahead, put those in the chat for us to put up on this board. If it means, for example, separated bike lanes, or maybe the better answer is a shared use side path, a shared use path for pedestrians and cyclists, so that the cyclists are not on the road itself. What might be good answers for us to consider. Okay, I see wider sidewalks and narrower, I have a hard time saying that, sorry, narrower lanes. So that's something good we could consider, definitely narrowing the travel lanes and getting wider sidewalks in there. That might be very helpful on 107th and 87th, for example, definitely to assist us. Okay, any other thoughts real quick before we move back out of the Miro? Pedestrian friendly signal timing. That's a good point. And we could even consider, and Maria, if you'll put this in, leading pedestrian indicators, which basically is the opportunity for pedestrians to get a green light before vehicles get a green light. So it gives them a few seconds to start their walk. And then a note that when it rains, some of the pedestrian areas flood. So that's an important component to be thinking about. Minimizing flooding on sidewalks. Okay. Well, I think at this point, we've got a lot of stuff up there, which is great. And, like I said, we're going to continue to build on it, and we have another set tomorrow night. So we're going to have even more. And I really want to thank you for helping us bring this through. And Maria, if you go ahead and stop sharing, then I will bring back our PowerPoint, hopefully. I'll attempt. Oh, now it's working better, so that's good. Let's try this. Okay, so a couple more quick thoughts. I know that we have taken your time this evening to talk about the charrette, and we, like I said, we have another one tomorrow night. But if you really want to get down and deep dive into some of these, station areas and what they might look like, DTPW is doing a transit-oriented development study. They are focusing on 4 station areas. They are 107th, 97th, the Wedge, and Lejeune. They have looking at, they're doing a deeper dive than we're doing in our effort, but we are working together. So they're not, in opposition, in conflict with each other. They're collaborative. They have a public comment crowdsource map that's out there today. The link is there. But there's also some public meetings that are going to be coming up. So be on the lookout for notices of those in the coming weeks. And their study will be complete in spring. So just in a few months. And I think with that, I'm gonna, and we put the crowdsourced map link in the chat for everyone. Thank you, Francisco. So if you're, it may be helpful because trying to type all this in would be difficult, of course. So you can click on the chat and bring you right into that if you want. And with that, I'm gonna turn this back over to Mary Tery to bring us home.
Thank you, Wyatt. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I would like to let you know that the video for today's charrette will be posted on the TPO YouTube channel, and you can access that via our TPO website. Like Wyatt said, tomorrow will be another charrette. We will be presenting the same material presentation. For those that were not able to come today, your neighbors, co-workers that live or work along the corridor, please let them know. We welcome your input. And for those that may have additional questions, here on the screen, you can see my contact information. You can drop me an email. And again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Have a wonderful night and stay safe. Thank you, everybody.